Hi, Brandon.
Hi, Linda. Nice to see you again.
Quick thanks to Mitra and Clive from Dayon for taking us through some of the tech developments and current challenges. So let's leap right in here. What are your top corporates saying right now about their concerns about getting back on the road?
Yeah, so, there's a lot of requests coming from the corporates to us because there's so much chaos and, a disintermediation of information amongst them. So they're trying to make sense of where is it safe to go, when is it safe, and how can we support them with providing that information so that they can make those better and more informed decisions. They're also asking, for a lot more policy controls. And interestingly, in terms of all the conversations we've had today about new technologies and so forth, we are also being asked sometimes to pull back and implement more analog services, such as those with, travel counselors on the phone talking to travelers and advising them through. And that, again, I think has to do with disparate information sources and travelers trying to make those decisions.
Certainly, we seem to be hearing that there's this acceleration on the digital side, but we're also hearing that, people may well go back to their travel agent. How do you see that kind of being balanced?
Yeah, so like I said, right now, there's more policy control in place. There are more purposeful, checkpoints before a company says, yes, it's okay for a traveler to go somewhere on a business trip. And so then the need for that travel counselor, that they can ask questions, have better contacts, but also manage that policy in real time and make some of those, helpful guidances for travelers. So we have to focus on providing those travel counselors with the right tools and access to information so that they can then forward that on, in their conversation with the traveler.
So one of the things you mentioned just there was the sort of difficulty of all the different pieces of information coming from all different directions. Do you see a need for a sort of single source of truth? And would that ever be a possibility?
I mean, that is the real goal for sure. Single source of truth. Everybody's looking for it. Right now, we look a lot to governments, and then we look at layers and new, aggregation of data into, what we assemble to be a single source of truth, or many single sources of truth compiled into one. And then it's important that we have easy capability for the individual to go into that platform and access the information that's very specific to them, to their needs, to their upcoming travel. And, that's no easy task. There are examples, I think, of good single sources of truth like Thematic, provided by IATA. We use another solution as well that we're providing to customers of CWT, provided by a company called Sherpa. That's, again, aggregating different government resources, different health department resources from both state, local governments, as well as federal governments. So you're having to bring all these sources together and then allow somebody to access them in a meaningful way for that individual. Some of the solutions, they really present you with a laundry list or, the full report of everything you might need to know. And that's good as a kind of, cover all your bases. But, if we're going to use technology well, and if we're going to service travelers and help them make well-informed decisions, we have to curate that information and make it specific to them.
So clearly health and wellness of the traveler is going to be more meaningful going forward. What's the role of technology in that, would you say?
There's a number of roles. And there's so many aspects to the travel journey to think about when it comes to the health and wellness. So there's the preparation for travel. So we've talked about that sort of now new sources and how do we put those in context at the time somebody's making decisions on a trip or a particular carrier, hotel accommodation. And then there's once they're on the road and how do we update that traveler should the situation change. So, if they're traveling in a certain country and there's an outbreak, and this is thinking farther into the future about, how do we consider health and wellness? How do we communicate with that traveler and give them information of what do they do now? Do they need to exit the country? Do they need to stay put, stay in their hotel? So there's all those aspects of just curating information, getting it delivered in a timely manner in the right context to the individual. There's all these technologies we've heard about throughout the event today about going through an airport and how biometrics get used as we're checking in and going to our destination. And then you also have more, I think, that we need to do in the prediction space so that in the business travel context, companies can make better informed policy decisions. And those policies are likely going to have to be flexible, and they're, I think, for a while going to be moving a bit. So we think about data sets that help us predict future pandemics or epidemics in a particular location. And how do I want to update my travel policy in real time? And then even if that's the extent of preventing travel to that particular location for a period of time, or extracting travelers from that location. So those things need to move and be a little bit more fluid in the future.
It's interesting that you touch on sort of predictive analytics there. So I think corporate travel was beginning to talk about that a little bit pre-pandemic and how it could be brought to play. But actually, now that everything's been turned on its head, do you have to recreate all of those data sets to get any meaningful kind of insight from it?
Well, I think there are the data sets, that are business travel specific that we've been using for quite some time. I think what's different is merging those with new sets of data, and then creating new outputs and the predictive analytics that you mentioned. So to me, it's how do we find new sources of information that's more real time, different context perhaps than what we've been looking at in the past, and more of a focus on the health and wellness aspect. And so things like in today's context, the COVID outbreaks, number of cases. So for example, we've brought those into tools so that travel managers again can be assessing what's the situation here? Do I need to make a policy change? But as we talk to companies who have been looking at health data for quite some time, maybe it's stepping outside of the traditional travel and hospitality industry and looking at other industries, and how do you incorporate that data so that it merges with the business travel data, and then you can use that to make new decisions and present new information.
And when you say other industries, perhaps other sources, what are you thinking there?
Well, even now, we look at a lot of tools are sourcing from like the University of Oxford. There's health data coming from, as we think even about these vaccine credentials, right? So how do you tap into the actual health industry information where appropriate, and how do you do that while protecting the privacy of individuals? So it's no easy task. A long time we've been considering, how payment information flows. So when you look at the financial industry, how do we do more there so that there's better information flowing as far as how travelers are operating? Sometimes you see that information being used to locate travelers based on where a credit card swipe has happened, for example.
So the travel management community is used to dealing with legislation, corporate manslaughter, and those areas. But is there more concern now that kind of the buck stops with them, so they have to be sure to be, managing their travelers, managing their safety in an even greater way than before?
I don't think the overall calculus changes in this regard. So our clients bear a duty of care to their own employees and their travelers, right? We provide many services, tools, information sets, data technology, so forth, to our clients that they evaluate for those purposes. And we create those products in consideration of their requirements of duty to care. Now, any given customer may choose to deploy certain tools that TMC provides. They might use another third party for some other aspect. So they have to assemble all these parts and then put those in front of the traveler and build their own travel program from it. So I think there will be more expectations of what TMCs provide, the information sets that we talked about, the context again in the booking process, and the support that's provided on journey with the traveler. But the overall equation, I think, has to stay the same for some time. So no, significant concern, but an awareness that still we are needing to evolve and adapt to the new reality.
So there are obviously frequent flyers out there, and they're probably often first movers with the technology. And then there are those who probably fly maybe a handful of times a year, maybe even less. So how do you strike that balance and, taking care of one group versus the other?
Yeah, well, I think we've always had to provide different options for service and access to those services. So whether somebody wants to pick up the phone and like I said earlier, speak with a travel counselor, you need to make that easy and convenient for them. But for folks that want to use more digital services, you certainly need to provide those today. I always think any good technology is one that's very easy for anybody to use, regardless of whether they're tech savvy or not. It should cater to any individual's need and provide a very smooth, frictionless experience. So, I think we have to keep on with that as our guiding principle. But, you still have services that, like I said, are more analog. And I think in the business travel context, though, you're typically going to a certain level or standard that there are many digital tools and access to your services through, like I said, apps, whether that be messaging. I think one evolution that's important to point out here is how the two start to come together more. I think that, this kind of human in the loop experience when anybody's interacting with technology is more and more important. So therefore, when we have a digital app, how do I access a human, in the context of booking or whatever it might be, so that if I have a question, I can get that human-based support as well. And then people have different situations. One moment I need something that I want to do completely self-service, and the next moment I need somebody on the phone to talk to because my situation has changed. So it's the merging of those two and how your platforms allow for your offline support to always be available through digital means.
And is there I know airlines are having to be sort of super flexible with operations right now. Does the same go for travel management companies, in the sense that as travel comes back, they need to be able to sort of flex up their staffing to cope while all the time developing the digital solutions?
Yeah, absolutely. We're constantly monitoring travel trends. Actually, currently we're looking at vaccination rates and how do those vaccination rates correspond to or correlate to upticks in actual business travel, leisure travel. So there's constant forecasting and capacity planning because yes, absolutely, we're gonna have to scale up and down. And I imagine there will be sort of that accordion effect for a little bit of time, as we see case numbers fall down, and then if you see a spike, you're gonna draw back a bit. I think that's gonna be the reality.
So would you say that there are technology issues that have been put in the spotlight by the pandemic?
Well, the industry has been grappling with a lot of big issues for some time. For example, content. How do we access content and put that forward, right? So we've been talking a lot about new distribution capabilities, allow airlines better access to business travelers and better merchandising opportunities through those capabilities. But a lot of the focus so far has been in that look and book or shop and book capacity, so the upfront aspect, but not, as much attention has been paid to the servicing once those bookings are made. Now, that said, we have those capabilities through the GDSs. But when you have a, hopefully once in a lifetime event like a pandemic, and we saw the mass cancellations of flights and unused tickets and vouchers being distributed, that's where, there was definitely a lack of capability there for how do we manage all of those unused tickets? How do we make sure we have visibility to them so that corporations can assess, what was the lost value and how did they reuse that for future business travel? And so that was a big setback, but I think what it does is it puts a highlight as we plan going forward and continue to think about the new distribution capabilities. We need to make sure we're thinking about all of those aspects of servicing, just not the shop and book and purchase process.
So as we've heard in the previous session, there are many developments around health passports and the challenges around them as well. So what's the reality of something getting off the ground in a sort of timely and impactful manner?
Well, I think we heard from Dan and looking at the Verify app, and you see, I think, really meaningful progress there and with some other solutions. But we have to point out the reality that there are different constituents in this space and different stakeholders. And as we continue to deal with kind of the plethora of apps coming at it from a different angle, we're in a race to figure out sort of what rises to a certain threshold that meets enough of the need that then the standards, I think, get built around that leading solution or a few leading solutions. The other part that sort of breaks the mold is if we have major governments, if the EU or the United States, for example, were to implement a standard or actually implement some sort of health passport to be used for the context of travel, then we would look at everybody sort of retrofitting perhaps solutions and trying to meet those needs. And then I think we would grow from there. But right now we're seeing individual states sometimes implement health pass solutions. We see countries implementing those, and we see airlines. So, earlier, as we've talked a few times today about interoperability, nobody wants to download a new app for one airline check-in and then another app for their destination, whether that be a state or national government requirement. So that every trip I need to think about two or maybe more if there's another one at the accommodation provider that I'm staying at. So I do think that interoperability is a necessity, but that means that we have to have some kind of standard to build towards. And whether that's going to be based around testing or vaccination requirements, has yet to be seen. Certainly, we have to have some space for both because there inevitably will be some portion of the population that either can't receive a vaccine or for whatever reason they don't have one. So you have to have that testing aspect too, which then means you have to have the standards around the testing, which creates a lot of complication for how that all gets built back into the apps, and then how do we actually move through our lives, in a meaningful way where this is adding some convenience, because I think ultimately that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to remove quarantine restrictions. We're trying to ease check-in process for airlines, and we're trying to open up the industry again in as safe a way as possible. So it's going to continue that pressure that we keep moving together and work together to make good solutions for the business travelers, for the consumers, and that'll benefit the industry.
Brandon, I think we'll have to end it there. Thank you very much. So that's Brandon, he's Senior Director of Innovation, CWT. And up next, my colleague Mitra will be discussing the big sort of picture with Cherry Jones, who's founder of Travelocity and founding chairman of Kayak. And that will bring us almost full circle from where Gloria took us in this morning. So thanks again, Brandon.
Thanks, Linda.